Alert! Colombia supports Cuba. In an unexpected turn of events in international politics, Colombia emerged as a key player in the recent decision by the United States to remove Cuba from its list of state sponsors of terrorism. This action, which has captured worldwide attention, highlights Colombia's strategic role in regional diplomacy and its commitment to peace in Latin America. The inclusion of Cuba on the list of state sponsors of terrorism by the United States has been a recurring issue in bilateral relations. During the Donald Trump administration, and under the influence of then-Colombian President Ivan Duque, Cuba was reinstated on this list. Duque argued that Cuba's refusal to extradite members of the National Liberation Army, ELN, involved in attacks in Colombia justified this designation. With the arrival of Gustavo Petro to the presidency of Colombia, the country's stance on Cuba underwent a significant change. Petro, known for his progressive approach and his emphasis on dialogue, considered the designation of Cuba as a state sponsor of terrorism to be counterproductive to peace efforts in the region. Consequently, his government initiated diplomatic efforts to persuade the United States to reverse this designation. Colombian Foreign Minister Luis Gilberto Murillo stressed that from the beginning of the Petro administration, clear instructions were given to work on removing Cuba from the list. These efforts included official communications and dialogues with U.S. representatives, highlighting Cuba's role as a facilitator in the Colombian peace processes. On January 14, 2025, U.S. President Joe Biden announced the removal of Cuba from the list of state sponsors of terrorism. This decision was seen as recognition of Cuba's constructive role in promoting peace in Colombia and a positive response to the requests of the Petro government. Biden said the move sought to strengthen diplomatic relations and promote stability in the region. The reaction in Colombia was one of satisfaction. President Petro praised Biden's decision, highlighting the importance of dialogue and cooperation in international relations. The Colombian Foreign Ministry also expressed its gratitude to the Cuban people for their support in the peace processes. For his part, former President Juan Manuel Santos described the measure as an act of justice that should have been taken earlier, recognizing Cuba's contribution to ending the armed conflict in Colombia. However, not all reactions were positive. Conservative sectors in the United States criticized the decision, arguing that Cuba still harbors fugitives and maintains relations with groups considered terrorists. Senator Rick Scott called Biden's action reckless and dangerous, noting that the Cuban regime continues to play a destabilizing role in the region. The removal of Cuba from the list of state sponsors of terrorism has multiple implications. Economically, it opens the door to the reduction of sanctions and facilitates international financial transactions with the island. Diplomatically, it improves relations between the United States and Cuba and strengthens Colombia's role as a mediator in the region. However, uncertainty persists due to the impending change in the U.S. administration. Incoming President Donald Trump has stated his intention to reverse several of Biden's policies, including the designation of Cuba. The confirmation of Marco Rubio as the new Secretary of State, known for his tough stance on Cuba, could indicate a return to stricter policies. Colombia's intervention in the removal of Cuba from the list of state sponsors of terrorism underscores the importance of active diplomacy and dialogue in resolving international conflicts. As the political landscape evolves, it will be crucial to observe how the nations involved navigate these changes and what impact they will have on regional peace and stability. In a diplomatic move that promises to redefine relations in Latin America, the Colombian ambassador to Cuba, José Noé Ríos, has firmly supported President Gustavo Petro's request to remove the island from the list of state sponsors of terrorism. This decision not only eases historical tensions between nations, but also opens up a range of economic and social opportunities for both parties. The inclusion of Cuba on said list had imposed more than 240 restrictions of an economic, political, and social nature, affecting everything from access to international credit to financial transactions and foreign trade. Ambassador Rios pointed out that these limitations had been a significant obstacle to the economic and social development of the island. With the recent decision by the United States to remove Cuba from this list, the Caribbean nation is expected to once again access international financing, attract foreign investment, and reactivate key sectors such as tourism. For Colombia, this measure represents an opportunity to strengthen trade relations with Cuba. Ambassador Rios stressed that, due to the sanctions, Colombian financial institutions were prohibited from carrying out transactions with the island, which severely limited bilateral trade. With the removal of these restrictions, the door is open to an increase in economic exchange, benefiting sectors such as biotechnology and health. Beyond the economic benefits, the decision has a moral and diplomatic component. Cuba has been a key player in the peace processes in Colombia, facilitating dialogues between the government and armed groups. The inclusion of the island on the list of countries that support terrorism had generated a feeling of ungratefulness towards a country that has contributed significantly to regional stability. Ambassador Rios described the measure as an act of justice and expressed his hope that it marks the beginning of a new stage in bilateral relations. The end of the United States blockade of Cuba would be a historic and transformative step for both nations. This blockade, in effect since 1962, has severely limited the economic and social development of the island, affecting millions of Cubans. However, with the recent exclusion of Cuba from the list of countries that support terrorism, a window of opportunity opens to end this policy. Proponents of lifting the blockade argue that this would allow Cuba to access international markets, receive foreign investment, and significantly improve its infrastructure and quality of life. Furthermore, it would strengthen diplomatic and economic ties between the United States and Cuba, promoting an era of cooperation and mutual understanding. On the other hand, critics fear that lifting the blockade could be interpreted as an acceptance of the Cuban regime without demanding changes in its internal policies. However, it is undeniable that the end of the blockade could mark the beginning of a new stage of prosperity and peace in the region, benefiting not only Cuba, but also its neighbors and the international community in general. The future of this measure is still uncertain, but the hope for positive change is still alive. The international community is watching closely, hoping that this is the first step towards lasting reconciliation and a brighter future for all. Despite the optimism generated by this decision, Ambassador Rios acknowledged that there is uncertainty about the future of this measure, especially in light of a possible return of Donald Trump to the presidency of the United States. During his administration, Trump had reinstated Cuba on the list of countries that support terrorism, arguing its refusal to extradite ELN members involved in an attack in Bogota. However, for now, the exclusion of Cuba from this list represents a significant step toward the normalization of relations and the promotion of peace and development in the region. This support from the Colombian ambassador reflects a renewed commitment to diplomacy and international cooperation, laying the foundations for a more prosperous and harmonious future between Colombia and Cuba.